Do the impossible, see the invisible, row, row, fight the power. Those words may have become a bit of a meme in the anime community, but they are a good summarization of Gurren Lagann's core themes. Pursuing goals that may not seem achievable and fighting against those who would try to keep you down. It's incredibly inspirational, but at the same time, I don't think it fully captures the show's message. A lot of people love the series for its style, its action, its absolute absurdity, and it's hard to blame them. The sheer hype the show bleeds is intoxicating, but because of that, I think a lot of its nuance is frequently overlooked. So today, I would like to explore what I think the series is trying to say about how one should go about achieving their dreams, and how its cast of characters serves to flesh out this message. This is an analysis of how Gurren Lagann wants you to do the impossible. Let's begin by separating the show's cast into two categories that tend to dictate how they tackle a given problem: logical characters and illogical characters. Now, when I say logic, I don't mean traditional friendship conquers all anime logic. I'm talking about things like problem solving, critical thinking, and common sense. The logical characters in this show are the ones who tend to be more pessimistic, or perhaps more realistic about the nature of their struggles, and they develop detailed strategies to overcome them. I see characters like Lord Genome, Rossiu, and the Anti-Spiral as good examples of this type of character. Contrary to this, the illogical characters tend to operate on optimism, confidence, and faith. They don't really care about the details. They know the end goal they're striving for, and they push towards it no matter how unrealistic or out of reach it may seem. Examples of this type of character would be Kamina and most of Team Daiguren. In other words, our heroes. Now, there is more nuance to these characters that I'm going to delve into later. But for now, I think this is a solid generalization that most people who have seen the series would probably agree with. Having established that, let's dive into how these characters go about achieving their goals throughout the show, and what we can learn from them. Overall, each of the characters we see tends to share a common goal: the preservation of life. While they go about it in different ways, it's always at the forefront of their minds, driving their actions throughout the series. The Anti-Spiral is trying to stop the Spiral Nemesis from destroying the universe. Lord Genome is trying to protect humanity from the Anti-Spiral, while also preventing the Spiral Nemesis. And of course, Team Daiguren is fighting to protect the Earth and everyone who lives there. The core conflict of the series doesn't originate from a difference in ideals, but instead from a difference in how they believe those ideals should be pursued, or rather, how they think those goals can be achieved. The logical characters tend to prioritize horrific but effective methods, believing that sacrifices are necessary in the pursuit of the end goal. The Anti-Spiral's solution to their challenge was to serve as a sort of gatekeeper, stagnating their own evolution and annihilating any spiral life forms who became too powerful. Lord Genome, once the champion of humanity, chose to confine his fellow humans to tiny underground villages for 1,000 years in order to stifle their growth. Rossiu staged a coup against one of his closest friends, and was even willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of lives in his attempt to preserve humanity. They are all terrifying, brutal solutions, and each of them realize this. But at the same time, these are the best solutions they could come up with given their circumstances. If the Anti-Spiral let spiral lifeforms continue to grow unimpeded, the entire universe would meet its end. If Lord Genome didn't oppress humanity, the Anti-Spirals would likely wipe them out. It's a case of the ends justifying the means, and no matter what it takes, they have the resolve to keep pushing forward. But it's important to note that every single one of these plans is eventually thwarted over the course of the series. Both Lord Genome and the Anti-Spiral are defeated by Team Daiguren, and while Rossiu wasn't beaten by them per se, they succeeded in driving back the Anti-Spiral when he failed. Given this, it's easy to say that our heroes, the more illogical and optimistic ones, are the models that the show wants us to follow. But I think this overlooks a lot of scenarios where that reckless optimism had real, detrimental consequences to the characters and the world around them. Kamina, for example, lost his life by being excessively reckless during the battle against Timilf. He was fighting in a gunman that was comparatively weaker than what he was used to, and even left his gunmen in the middle of the battle, all without really acknowledging any of the risks that he was taking. His death is heartbreaking, but given his behavior, it's honestly not surprising that his luck eventually ran out. Later in the series, we see something similar during the first assault by the anti-spiral forces. Despite not knowing anything about this enemy, Simone charges right in with guns blazing, and while he does dispatch it quickly, the battle results in significant damage to the surrounding city and the loss of countless lives. He was so lost in the main goal, defeating his foe, that he failed to think of the consequences his actions might have. These moments do a good job of showing us that this line of thinking has its flaws, regardless of how inspirational it might seem. Not only that, but the series has numerous moments where logical thought prevails when illogical thought falters. A good example of this comes in episode 7, where Kamina and Simone are clashing with Timmel for the first time. Filled with reckless confidence, Kamina wants to charge into the enemy and challenge the Beastmen head-on. It's only when Simone interjects that he eventually reconsiders. In this scene, Simone is acting more in line with the logical characters. He's driven to some degree by his inhibitions and fears, but he's also trying to look at the bigger picture. How can they realistically beat such a giant gunman with the forces that they have? Logically, they can't. Kamina quickly agrees. He decides to trust in Simone's mind and abilities to get them out of this predicament. And Simone succeeds. It's hard to guess exactly how a head-on assault would have turned out, but the tactical retreat, followed by the development of an actual strategy, is a big part of what allows them to successfully defeat Timilf in the following episode. Not only did logical thinking prevail, but Kamina of all people acknowledged its value and placed his faith in it. So, what does all of this mean? The show seems to be riddled with conflicting ideas about whether the logical or illogical path is the one we should lead. I believe it's trying to tell us that neither line of thinking is completely correct. Instead, they both have their inherent values, a time and place where they are most useful and arguably necessary. While Team Daiguren's loudest members tend to be the more illogical ones, we can't overlook characters like Liron, Yoko, and Simone. Each of them is integral to the overall success of humanity, and each of them tend to display elements of both lines of thinking over the course of the series. They are certainly capable of that brash optimism we know and love, but they're also sensible and realistic about most of the challenges they face. And I think that towards the end of the series, we see a lot of our heroes move towards that balance. During the final battle against the Anti-Spiral, humanity is faced with the greatest foe it has ever encountered. A big part of what keeps our heroes going is their optimism, their confidence and bluster in the face of inevitable despair. But that only takes them so far. Time after time, they find themselves backed into a corner where they are forced to acknowledge the limits of their abilities, and the only way to proceed is to make incredible sacrifices. The most notable of these is Kitan, who volunteers for a suicidal mission to destroy the Death Spiral machine. This is not just some spur-of-the-moment decision. They have some time to think it through and even test out a plan that would allow them all to escape unharmed. But when that plan fails, they realize that sacrificing one of their own is, logically, the best chance they have to push forward. It's not ideal, but it's all they can come up with given the circumstances. It's that brutally realistic decision that allows them to escape the Death Spiral field and keep moving forward. But it's not just the illogical characters who begin to move toward the center of the spectrum. During the final battle, with the Anti-Spiral nearing what seems like an inevitable victory, we see a montage of various characters losing their hope and confidence. But at the end of that montage, the very first character to break that pattern is none other than Rosyu. The man who was once so entrenched in his brutal logic that he was willing to sacrifice most of humanity, ends up being the first one to confidently say that our heroes will still win. No matter how unrealistic it may seem in that moment, he chooses faith in his comrades over despair. And sure enough, our heroes are able to pull through because of their immutable confidence. Throughout the series, we see moments where reckless optimism succeeds, where our heroes kick logic to the curb and do the impossible, and we see moments where it fails. We see moments where the more realistic and logical approach succeeds, and moments where it fails. But our characters are only able to overcome their greatest challenges by embracing both. They acknowledge their own shortcomings, and they trust in their comrades and friends to fill in the gaps. You can't simply choose one or the other. Both lines of thinking have their merits, and they both have their faults. You need that illogical heart to pursue your dream against what may seem like insurmountable odds, and you also need a logical mind to successfully achieve that goal. In this way, Gurren Lagann delivers a surprisingly honest message, an inspirational one that doesn't shy away from the cruelty of reality. No one line of thinking is inherently better than the other, and only by cultivating both, only by acknowledging their values, can you hope to truly do the impossible. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I would be grateful if you left a like down below, and if you want to see more from me, go ahead and subscribe to the channel while you're at it. Let me know down in the comments if you have any ideas for future topics you'd like me to discuss. Until next time, this is Paradigm, and I hope you have a phenomenal day.